I'm Kripolish with Madison ModPo on my left, Jim and Lou. Lou's on my right, and we're going to look at a poem by John Ashbery, Farm Implements and Rutabagas in a Landscape. And I'm going to help lead us on discussion or in discussion. And rather than me reading the poem, I think it would be best if Mr. Ashbery did that for us via recording of him on pen sound. So I'm going to play it right now.
Farm Implements and Rutabagas in a Landscape. The first of the undecoded messages read, "Popeye sits in thunder, unthought of. From that shoebox of an apartment, from livid curtains' hue, a tangram emerges, a country. Meanwhile, a sea hag was relaxing on a green couch. How pleasant to spend one's vacation en la casa de Popeye. She scratched her cleft chin's solitary hair. She remembered spinach and was going to ask Wimpy if he had bought any spinach. "My love," he intercepted, "the plains are decked out in thunder today, and it shall be as you wish." He scratched the part of his head under his hat. The apartment seemed to grow smaller. But what if no pleasant inspiration plunge us now to the stars, for this is my country? Suddenly they remembered how it was cheaper in the country. Wimpy was thoughtfully cutting open a No. 2 can of spinach when the door opened and Sweepy crept in. How pleasant. But Sweepy looked morose. A note was pinned to his bib. "Thunder and tears are unavailing," it read. "Henceforth shall Popeye's apartment be but remembered space, toxic or salubrious, whole or scratched." Olive came hurtling through the window. Its geranium scratched her long thigh. "I have news," she gasped. "Popeye, forced as you know to flee the country one musty, gusty evening by the schemes of his wizened duplicate father, jealous of the apartment and all that it contains, myself and spinach in particular, heaves bolts of loving thunder at his own astonished becoming, rupturing the pleasant arpeggio of our years. No more shall pleasant rays of the sun refresh your sense of growing old, nor the scratched tree trunks and mossy foliage. Only immaculate darkness and thunder." She grabbed Sweepy. "I'm taking the brat to the country." "But you can't do that. He hasn't even finished his spinach," urged the sea hag, looking fearfully around at the apartment. But Olive was already out of earshot. Now the apartment succumbed to a strange new hush. "Actually, it's quite pleasant here," thought the sea hag. "If this is all we need fear from spinach, then I don't mind so much. Perhaps we could invite Alice the goon over." She scratched one dug pensively. "But Wimpy is such a country bumpkin, always burping like that." Minute at first, the thunder soon filled the apartment. It was domestic thunder, the color of spinach. Popeye chuckled and scratched his balls. It sure was pleasant to spend a day in the country.
So there you have it. It's real easy. I've got just the form of the sestina here for you guys, and I think we could just quickly check in. So there's that. Here's a diagram form. If you like visual representations, there you go. The form, the first stanza sets, the pattern for later, because the endings of the first stanza end up being repeated in different ways. And I tracked through the Ashbery poem, and the only variation that I could see was the so-called envoy, the three-line stanza at the end. And that requires that three of the endings be repeated as end lines in the envoy, and the remaining words are repeated in the text. So it's complicated as all heck. And we have to thank a 12th century poet from Provençal who came up with this monstrous form. And he adhered to the content. The word line endings in this for the envoys were ECA or ACE, and with Ashbery I think he may have varied somewhat in the Envoy, but I'm not sure it matters much. It was AEC, as I looked at it. But Ashbery says, you know, I give this to my students to help them jog something loose. The form being so rigid might help them explore whatever may lie in their unconscious. And that is what he told the Paris Review, or I'm sorry, the New York Quarterly, about the sestina form. He called it a probing tool, or a device to get into remoter areas of consciousness. These forms, such as the sestina, were really devices in getting into remoter areas of consciousness. The really bizarre requirements of sestina I use as a probing tool rather than as form in the traditional sense. I once told somebody that riding a sestina is like riding downhill on a bicycle and having the pedals push your feet. I wanted my feet to be pushed into places that it wouldn't have normally taken. That's why I use these particular forms.
Well, the analogy is that you're not in control.
Yeah.
The form is in control.
Or
the
it's
pedals
unlocking.
on the bicycle going downhill. You're not in control of those pedals. Those pedals are, gravity is in charge, and they're pushing your feet. In the sestina, you're not in control of the poem. The form is in control of the poem, and you have to conform to the form if you're going to write one.
And yet he says it's liberating because it gives you access to something deeper in your own consciousness.
I guess so.
I'm not saying I agree with
See,
that.
I didn't understand this at
Yeah.
all, but now I understand what a sestina is, so I already learned immensely today.
That's right.
Oh.
I am with you.
Because before I thought he was putting us on, like Jackson Pollock
And
does,
There
or
you go.
somebody else. It was just a joke.
Well, there's a critic, now I think referred to as Stephanie Burt. At the time that I'm not good with the pronouns. At the time they wrote this, the name was Stephen Burt. And he has a whole long article about the use of sestinas in contemporary poetics. He's saying there's just been this explosion of sestinas. You know, what the heck is going on? And some part he was thinking, well, maybe that's just because we have all these writing schools and people are, taught how to use the
It's a
sestina.
fad, right?
Or there's something else going on. And he says, the sestina thus fits a poetics of diminished, regretful, comic self-skepticism, owing much to John Ashbery, in which only craft and entertainment remain as aspirations poets can actually reach.
So he's not attempting to explicate truth. He's really seeking to entertain you.
Yeah. Have fun.
Have fun.
It's a game, like
Yeah.
you said. Language is a game.
Yeah, it's in the Wittgensteinian kind of realm of the
But
language
this
game.
is the epitome of a language game.
Yeah.
Now, did you guys ever watch Popeye or read Popeye?
Sure.
Tell me, did you read it in comic strip form?
When I was young, it was in the Omaha World Herald every Sunday, and I loved it.
Yeah, it was, the comic strip became the second most popular comic strip among adults at one point. And early on was created, in the 1920s, and then, let's see here. The first time Popeye made an appearance was January 17th, 1929, by a fellow named E.C. Seeger. Then after his death, the comic strip passed on to others, and it took the form of prolonged piecemeal storytelling.
Right. There were stories and dramas between the various characters, especially.
And certain character traits.
Yeah, the woman character was fought over by the two men.
Well,
Right.
who I have right here. I'll probably throw these in.
There she is.
Olive oil was, took care of Sweet Pea when Popeye couldn't. Sweet Pea was delivered at Popeye's doorstep. And then for whatever arrangements, Olive Oil would take care of Sweet Pea, and when she couldn't, Popeye would.
So she was one of the original single mothers.
And it wasn't her child, or
But it wasn't her child, but she took care of it like it was
yeah.
in essence, it was her child. She took care of it like it was her child.
And of course, Popeye was known for eating his spinach, and that would make him strong, and he could confront whatever needed to be confronted. Oftentimes, that was Brutus, this gentleman here, who attempted to woo Olive Oil or whisk her away, and Popeye would save the day,
Right.
especially after the spinach. Popeye was known for not hitting a woman. He couldn't do that. In which case, Olive Oil occasionally had to come to the rescue with this sea hag, which
Don't remember. I never
Yeah.
saw that.
she was a pirate in the comic strip and really did not like Popeye at all. However, she was romanced by Wimpy, shown on the what is my right, who liked hamburgers, thought of himself as
Who liked what?
hamburgers,
Okay.
and
His favorite food was hamburgers.
I think this was an early vegan movement towards veganism.
he feigned a relationship with the sea hag. The sea hag never realized that Wimpy was just there for the food. And Wimpy always had a certain air of coming from aristocratic or richer background, even though he
So there are class themes, there are gender themes.
Yep, and Poop Deck Poppy was that's was Popeye's father. Then of course it was made into animated cartoon strips, often preceding movies.
Yeah, I remember that. That's
Yeah.
what I remember. I never
Yeah.
read them.
And I saw it on television a lot, where they would just,
Well,
fit
it was
those together.
like a situation thing, wasn't it, on TV?
Yeah, it was a much more simplified.
Yeah.
Everything happens in one scenario. I don't have much more to say than I've said. I would just like us to go through the poem and see what comes up.
All right, let's do it.
So, beginning with the title, Farm Implements and Rutabagas in a Landscape. I think that's a spoof on notions of landscape, or it sounds sort of like a Soviet Union.
Well, I wondered at first if there wasn't a real picture that he was looking at.
I couldn't find any specific painting like that.
It's just certainly an interesting conglomeration of words.
And I don't think the word rutabagas appears anywhere in the poem.
No, I don't believe it does.
And farm implements, I'm not sure that we see those either.
No, it's a nonsense title.
And just jump in as you guys may wish. The first of the undecoded messages. Well, undecoded is interesting. First of all, it implies that these messages were coded, not decoded, right? They were undecoded.
Undecoded is it's a paradox. It's a paradox.
Yeah.
Undecoded. If something is decoded, undecoded. What he's doing to me is he's sending me a bunch of coded messages, and I have to now I have to decode them.
Well, I thought of linguistics and
that's what
Wittgenstein
this whole poem is doing. I think is the code is the form, the sestina form. You've got to break the code in order to understand the poem.
if it's understandable, or if there's anything more to
Well,
it.
it's understandable in that it's a sestina.
Yeah.
It's a successful sestina.
And there's something of a narrative
But
that goes on.
if it's meant to entertain, then
It did.
It did.
Yeah.
Now, linguistic or Wittgenstein language, the word code, does that signal anything to you?
Sure.
You lay that out a little bit.
Well, what he comes to is that he's really coming to the limit of using language, formal language with clear notions of what words mean to describe or interpret the world we live in, to get to the truth, whatever you want to say. And he says the reality is that it's used as a living system, and you're really only likely to understand something in the context it's being used, and with the motivations of the people using it, and it's evolving.
And how is that like a code? Or how does he use?
Then it becomes, the words have to be decoded by understanding the
Got it.
context,
Okay,
the syntax.
that's the project.
Yeah.
Then, Popeye Sits in Thunder, that sounds Zeus-like. And this is in quotes. Popeye sits in thunder unthought of.
Is thunder a big part of the Popeye story?
No.
No,
Okay.
it's just one of the excuses for the sestina.
Popeye sits in thunder unthought of. So nobody's paying attention to him. Then we get from that shoebox of an apartment, the livid curtains hue. Livid is angry.
Or brilliant.
Brilliant.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, so curtains hue. Tangram, as I read it, was a Chinese type
Puzzle.
puzzle.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought it was a contraction of telegram somehow, but.
I thought it might be a bird, but
Okay.
A puzzle made of many shapes, like 7 pieces.
Yeah, okay, I get it.
Like people who do glass, put glass pieces together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so a tangram emerges, a country. All right. So a country is something of a puzzle, and this is all in a quote
A shape.
attributed to no one. So, all right, so you have that. Meanwhile, the sea hag was relaxing on a green couch. How pleasant to spend one's vacation on La Casa de Popeye. Does that mean, I looked this up once, in the home of Popeye?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why would he throw
Popeye's
the
home.
Spanish language in the middle of this poem? Yeah, it's Spanish for Popeye's home.
Yeah, on La Casa de Popeye, she scratched her cleft chin. And she scratches her chin, that's one part of her anatomy that's being scratched, in contrast to the anatomy that Popeye scratches at the very end of the poem, his balls. So,
There you go.
spend one vacation over us, be scratched. She remembered spinach. Spinach being emblematic of Popeye and all the rest. Really a very central part of every Popeye narrative that I saw via cartoons.
But it was the key when I was young and reading this as a way of getting kids to eat spinach.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When spinach came in a can because of the war and so on, you couldn't
That's right.
get fresh vegetables.
That's
So
right.
they wanted kids to eat vegetables, and kids didn't like spinach. And I thought that was one of the reasons why Popeye was invented,
Like
to
the-
get kids interested in eating spinach.
some PR
Rutabagas.
firm hired by the Spinach Growers Association came up with the idea.
Yeah, perhaps. But it worked because every time we had spinach, Popeye always came up, and I always ate all my spinach. So, my parents or my grandparents would say, "Be sure you eat all your spinach so you can be strong like Popeye."
So then she remembered spinach and was going to ask Wimpy, and as I said, they have something of a relationship. If he bought any spinach, and my love, he intercepted, which sort of sounds like intercepting a coded message, but he intercepted.
He intercepted.
The plains are decked out in thunder today, and it shall be as you wish. He scratched the part of his head under his hat. So he seems to be using lofty language,
Yeah.
right?
What-
The
what-
plains are docked out in the thunder.
What's the poetic or the he used my love, he interjected, but he didn't interject, he intercepted. So it's a word used for another word in a kind of an absurd way.
Yeah.
So that may be very profound if I understood what he was doing.
And what he says after that doesn't really follow
Doesn't
either,
make
right?
any sense either. So
But
it's funny.
yeah. And then, of course, today and shall be as you wished, he scratched head. So then we get the apartments seem to grow smaller, but if there is no pleasant inspiration, plunge us now. But what if there's no pleasant inspiration? Plunge us now to the stars, for this my country. So then we move on to suddenly they remembered how it was cheaper in the country. And notice how use the same word, but it has a different meaning.
Sure.
So you can't even rely on the word having the same
Once
meaning.
again, back to language games.
Yes.
I think there's something to be said that all these people were affected by that.
Yeah.
As well as 100 dozen other things, like
But no,
traditions in poetry and so forth.
So Wimpy was thoughtfully cutting open. How thoughtful! He was cutting open the number 2 can of spinach. Why number 2 can? Do you
Yeah.
remember? Was number 1 high quality and number 2 lower quality?
No, they were the size.
Size.
Ah.
So, and I don't know, it was bigger or littler, but it must be, the number 2 can must be the can you get in the store with spinach in it.
I think so.
I'll go with that. So then we have Sweet Pea creeping in. How pleasant. Now, I guess that he says, Sweet Pea says that.
Mm-hmm.
But Sweet Pea looked morose. And a note pinned to his bib, thunder and tears are unavailing. So, the roaring won't get you anywhere, and crying won't either. As one
Sure.
possibility. Henceforth shall Popeye's apartment be but remembered space. Toxic or salubrious, whole or scratched. You have these pairings of opposites here. Popeye's apartment be but remembered space.
And La Casa de Popeye.
Yeah. And they're hanging out there, and then the people in the apartment who really shouldn't be there get a message from someone saying, pronouncing again in high level language, henceforth shall Popeye's apartment be but remembered space, as if it's going to be a thing of the past. And how it's remembered presumably will be
Pleasant or
yeah, will
unpleasant?
be determined by the person remembering.
Sure.
Then Olive appears, hurtling through the window, and it wasn't the glass that scratches her. The geraniums scratch her long thigh. I have news. Popeye, forced as you know to flee the country, so country with a different meaning, one gusty evening by the schemes of the wizened duplicate father, jealous of the apartment and all that it contains, myself and spinach in particular, heaves bolts of loving thunder at his own astonished becoming. So, just to unpack that a little bit. Heaves bolts of loving thunder. Well, it sounds like Zeus. And you don't, bolts, you heave a bolt of lightning, you don't heave the thunder, but that's
well,
what
the thunder accompanies bolts of lightning and bolts.
He's
If
bolt
you think of a
of
bolt
loving
as
thunder.
as a
It collapses the two.
one thing, one entity.
Yes.
Each bolt of rolling thunder is kind of separated by the others.
Yeah, or in this case, loving
Kind of
thunder.
like,
It's a unit, basically, isn't it?
Sound and light being
Together.
together.
but just the word is, and the concept of loving thunder is great. I love that. Loving thunder. Why would you put that together?
Jealousy.
But it's nice.
Yeah.
Bolts of loving thunder.
And then he does this at his own astonished becoming, as if he's just become something that he was not, or as if he were just created at his own astonished becoming, rupturing the pleasant arpeggio of our years.
That's great.
Now, arpeggio is a musical term,
Right.
and I had tracked it down. I thought it meant, do you remember?
It's a track up or a track down. of
Chords
sound.
in succession.
Yeah, it's
Up
up or down.
That's
And
right.
it's a series of notes in a certain order that go up or go down. And it's often used to connect different keys. So when you want to go from one key to another, you can use an arpeggio and work in
As a
from one key
bridge.
into another. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So how does that arpeggio of our years fit with what just came before? His own astonished becoming, rupturing the pleasant arpeggio of our years.
Well, there's a kind of ease, a nice succession,
and he,
and blasts of thunder.
If you
Thunder
interrupt
rolls.
that, it's not an arpeggio.
No, and you're
You break it.
rupturing the pleasant.
yeah, all right, good. And then no more shall pleasant rays of the sun refresh your sense of growing old, nor the scratched tree trunks and mossy foliage, only immaculate darkness and thunder. So you've been living nicely with the rays of sun and your sense of growing old, and you won't have access to tree trunks and mossy foliage, but you're just gonna have darkness and thunder. And she grabs Sweet Pea and lovingly says, and I mean this most ironically, lovingly says, "I'm taking the brat to the country."
I'm not sure that's loving.
Yeah, that's hence
Or
the
that
irony.
what you're making out.
That's the irony.
I can't think of Sweet Pea as calling him a brat, but
Yeah, that why
he did.
I was saying ironical.
Okay, you said ironically.
Yeah. But you can't. And then the reply, but you can't,
Can't
do that. He hasn't had a spinach.
He hasn't finished his spinach.
And that came from the sea hag, who is not portrayed as having a maternal whisker
Yes,
on
yeah.
her chin.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
it's so he reverses things there as she looks fearfully around the apartment. But Olive was already out of earshot. Now the apartment succumbed to the strange new hush. So actually, it's quite pleasant here, thought the sea hag. If this is all we need fear from spinach, then I don't mind so much.
What are we fearing from spinach?
Yeah.
Well, if we don't eat our spinach, we get
Yeah.
thunder.
Or you fear Popeye after he eats his spinach.
Right.
Oh, I see. Strong, and so then he's fearful. Okay.
Then I don't mind so much. Perhaps we could invite Alice the Goon over. I couldn't find a visual representation of Alice the Goon, so did you guys remember that at all?
Not at all.
She scratched. One dug pensively, but Wimpy is such a country bumpkin, always burping like that, which is not the way he was portrayed in the cartoon. He always had the sophisticated airs. So he wasn't portrayed as a country bumpkin. But always burping, I don't know. I can minute, thank you. At first, the thunders, and then we hit the envoy. Soon filled the apartment. It was domestic thunder, the color of spinach. You know, what a jump right between
Just that's
Domestic
ridiculous.
Thunder, the color of spinach. Popeye chuckled and scratched his balls. It sure was pleasant to spend a day in the country. And
Funny.
he'd written, he wrote two more sestinas, one that preceded this one called The Painter. That was early on when he was, I think, still an undergrad. He did a sestina called The Painter early in his career. Then later in Flowchart, which is this really long poem. It takes up this whole book. But in the course of that poem, he provides a double sestina.
Wow.
Wow, now we're getting into the
That's kind of like nuclear physics.
yeah